I have never once in my life been intrigued to listen to a Pink Floyd album, but after hearing Roger Waters tell Mark Zuckerberg and Cenk Uygur to go fuck themselves last week, I became the biggest fan of all time.
And the answer is, fuck you. No fucking way.
The Wall, Pink Floyd's 11th studio album. This is an album that influenced much of the stuff we've covered on this channel, much of the stuff we have yet to cover on this channel. You recommended this, but one of the reasons I was interested to check it out is because when Apple Music dropped spatial audio last week, everyone, of course, wanted to go see The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon, and of course, that's like one of the only things they didn't add Dolby Atmos to. But this is kind of like the old school boomer Dolby Atmos. Unfortunately, we can't do our track-by-track typical reviews here because we'd be here for 16 hours, but we're going to try to give you one of those classic Fantano-style reviews, and we're going to try to cover as much ground as possible.
Yes, sir.
Without further, Bovine Excrement, In the Flesh, Part 1.
Question mark. At first, when you look at the full story of this album being just a typical rock star, you think, all right, like, whatever. It's just a rock star doing his thing. But then you really sit back and see the time, effort to make this album's story really stand out. To start this off with In the Flesh and the story of being a rock star, not being too sure of the path that he's already taking, and ending with the baby crying and like kind of the start of the album was definitely a great introduction to the whole thing.
He also talks to a fan about how his outward image of being a rock star doesn't actually add up to and represent his inner struggles. Brick in the Wall Part 1 provides a slow build up to the main song with a really dreamy delay pedal effects. One of the issues that I had with this album was that it takes, what is this, like 5 songs to get to the first actual song on this album, but it's almost kind of like watching a movie versus listening to an album, which is funny because they actually made a movie about this.
Yeah. The thin ice, kind of just the mental state starting to slip. And of course, one of the most popular songs of all time, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2.
Possibly the biggest song in the album, or at least the most recognizable, features an incredibly 70s disco feel to it. Pink provides an interesting metaphor for a factory that pretty much just pumps out bricks, as many kids feel in school. So many iconic lyrics and sound bites that even non-Pink Floyd fans or people that have never even heard the song can recognize, like the first lyrics and also the outro with the pudding and the meat.
Right, because how can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? I mean...
Right, that's a good point.
Jeff Cavalier right there.
Other than it being the first noteworthy song on the album, I'm not sure exactly why it's the most popular, because there were like 3 or 4 songs on here that I thought were eons better in terms of songwriting and lyricism. Still an iconic song nonetheless.
Even out of context of the concept album, it stands on its own 2 feet. I do agree there are other songs that I think are better, but it's still a good jam. Something that really stood out to me, David Gilmour's chorus where he says, "Mama's gonna make all your nightmares come true," projecting her fears onto him to help him build up this mental wall.
I didn't think Mother was necessarily a musical standout, but it does an excellent job of pushing the character of Pink forward. It's also interesting how it changes different perspectives throughout the song from Pink to his mother.
For a Goodbye Blue Sky, this one was more heavy on musicianship, and I think they were able to really capture the melancholy feeling of not being able to go outside and enjoy yourself.
Even though it's not one of the longer ones, Goodbye Blue Sky I also felt was a musical standout, especially for the different style of acoustic playing he throws in here. The flow between this one, Empty Spaces, and Young Lust are a prime example of one of the main strengths of the album, which are the transitions that again have influenced many albums and bands to come in all different genres, not just rock music. The way it explodes into Young Lust is also just a great representation of the rapid-fire shifts throughout flashbacks that Pink is having, especially about his newly discovered rock star lifestyle.
One of the best build-ups I've ever heard in my life, honestly. Young Lust is one of my favorite performances from Roger Waters on his bass, his little off-time tempo. Totally. And it's another standout that the radio plays and people would just, oh, I know that song, even if you don't know what it's about.
Oh. It's also one of the only songs in this album that appropriately scream rock and roll as it details his rock star lifestyle. Richard Wright's gritty organ, more crunchy guitar from David Gilmour, and the more aggressive vocal style. While most of the album up to this point sacrifices either storytelling for music or vice versa, this one is a perfect balance of both, I felt, with solid composition as Pink scares off a groupie before he can get revenge sex on his wife. So far, while the music is pretty good, it's the storytelling and the scene that they create that I think makes this album so historic and special.
Hey You being one of my personal favorites. Pink wondering if Building the Wall was the right choice. David Gilmour's fade on his guitar as he plays throughout most of the song is something that really captures the feeling of being kind of distant.
Hey You is the 69th iconic song so far just on this album. What a fantastic guitar tone, so glassy and spacey, and what's even more mind-blowing is how he was able to do it with a clean patch as opposed to one of the distorted ones where we have a little bit more flexibility. Then the worms are something that I think, again, we were talking about Atmos, that's like the first thing you want to go and listen to when you hear Atmos, because at the time that was kind of like the old school Atmos. Whoa, they're changing the different ears and all that shit, right? And that was mind-blowing at the time.
Yeah.
Nobody's Home is the Pink Floyd equivalent of when SpongeBob made friends with the napkin and the chip.
And the chip and the penny.
The gang's all here.
Or we're being invaded.
Oh, she got the toy.
Perfect.
In Comfortably Numb, Roger Waters is able to tie in his own experience of being pumped up on drugs before a stage show to further give insight into Pink's life.
Comfortably Numb, in my opinion, I don't know what comments will say, the best Pink Floyd song of all time.
No doubt.
Yeah. Right.
No doubt.
The excellent chemistry of David Gilmour and Roger Waters to switch vocals back and forth between the Doctor and then Pink. David Gilmour's guitar solos and guitar work in this. It is one of the most majestic, just graceful sounds I've ever heard in my entire life. I've never heard a guitar player really be able to capture the feeling that David Gilmour did in this song. It's hard, but it's nothing, John Petrucci or anything like that.
Actually, it is John Petrucci because he did the song live and he nailed it. He did his own Petrucci stuff.
Which I have to listen to.
Yes, you do.
If David Gilmour came onto the rock scene, did this one song and left, he'd still be just as famous.
The violence, slow tempo, and overall dreamy tone perfectly capture the feeling of the fever as well. The guitar solo also walks the fine line between that psychedelic Jimi Hendrix feel and also the prog neatness and meticulousness that we're used to. Yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of psychedelic rock music, but this has to easily be my favorite on the record for the space that they create, the environment that they create, this different sounds. David Gilmour really killed it too. He stole the show vocally on this one with that main chorus.
Yeah. And guitar. As the story progresses after that, this is where the psyche changes and he just goes off the wall. I think this is really part of the album where the average listener kind of is like, yeah, I'm just going to go listen to something else.
In the Flesh reprises the intro and also gives an accurate representation of a G.G. Allen concert. Run Like Hell is another musical standout with the return to the plucking delay guitar and the soaring leads and riffs over top of Pink fantasizing about being a Nazi, which ironically today would get you put in a camp. They complete the cycle of the wall, so again starts back up from the very beginning, which was awesome how they even... If you put it on loop, it transitions perfectly, and that's its own cycle. Overall, I was not expecting to like this album as much as I did. It really felt more like watching a movie compared to an album, which again, they did do the movie, so that kind of works there. There are definitely a lot of points where some of the musicianship was sacrificed in the name of pushing the story forward, but even in those moments, they did so successfully.
This album definitely earns its title of being one of the highest sellers and definitely one of a fan favorite for all the boomers. Like you said, they did sacrifice musicianship in certain parts to just have unique noises and sounds to continue the story, which was the whole point of the album, so there's no fault there.
Other than the longer than necessary track list, I think they nailed pretty much everything else. The story is one of the greatest that I've ever heard from any concept album. Really well thought out, really well done. The atmosphere and the scenes that they create, they took advantage of the newer technology at the time, stereo technology and the Sony Walkman and all the stuff that revolutionized the way you listen to music and became the de facto album you listen to on that kind of stuff.
These songs with that Dolby thing?
Oh yeah, that'd be insane. Fantastic. Overall, I'd give it a 7.5.
Pink Floyd was able to create one of the best pieces of music that I think any band strives to become.
The band strives to become a piece of music.
Piece of music, yeah. Overall, I'd have to give it an 8.5.